Welcome to the World Cup mood board. Netherlands, eh? You're here with 99.94, and I am Jarrod Kimber. Roll the tape. All right. We have a packed mood board today. And I would love to start with the Netherlands because I do believe that on one of their greatest days, they should get a lot of credit. We've actually got a lot of Netherlands content in this show today. But how can you not start with South Africa, considering it's South Africa and this is a World Cup, and here we are again and again and again. I don't know if a lot of people know this. The ICC exists in part because of South Africa. There was a triangular series that needed to be played between Australia, South Africa, and England in 1912. And in order to bring that together, they needed the Imperial Cricket Conference, which is now our International Cricket Council. That particular series, the South African team wasn't that strong. The Australian team wasn't that strong either. The Australian team was actually largely on strike. And the South African didn't send over the best 11, and they got humped in most of the games. I think they lost 2 of the games by 10 wickets and another one by an innings. But there was a game where they were beating Australia. I think they made over 300 on the first day on what was a really wet pitch. Second day, they bowled Australia out. They had a lead of just over 100 runs going into the final day of the test match with a very good chance of winning that test match. And it rained on the third day. So before we even knew that we had ICC tournaments, we had them, and South Africa was being thrown out of them or losing in them or struggling in them because of weather, because of chance, because of everything else. You know, we look at South Africa's history as being pretty bad since 1992. That was 1912. Look, I'm going to be honest. I had written down all the greatest South African... I mean, greatest is the wrong word, isn't it? All the grandest bad moments of South African World Cup history. And, 1992, it starts with the game where they need 22 off 13 balls, there's rain, then they need 22 off 1 ball. I mean, is what it is. If you look at 1999, you could make a very good argument that the South African team going into 1999 was perhaps the most dominant one-day team that we had seen between World Cups at that point. They had taken lessons from Australia, moved them forward, and then developed the game in a way that the way they were playing it wasn't like other teams. They were I think they were the most winningest team between a World Cup that we'd ever had at that point. Just absolutely powering through teams over and over again. And then you could argue that they collapsed twice in that 99 World Cup against Australia, in the first game and then in the second game. And Lance Klusener went from being the most destructive force we've ever seen to a man who almost got his teammate run out 2 balls in a row. I can go through the 2015 World Cup or 2011 World Cup. There's also just a bunch of Champions trophies and everything else that you could go through. And they're all worth mentioning, and I'm sure I'll do a proper video on all these sorts of things. But if you look at today, it's really interesting. This is the Netherlands' 8th game in this tournament. In that time, they have been I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say they've been terrible with the bat. They crawled over the line against the UAE, chasing 111. They limped their way to Namibia's 121. Sorry, not 221. They ended up with 135 and 123 against Bangladesh and India. Against Pakistan, they never crossed 100. Their greatest innings was probably chasing the 117 against Zimbabwe. And then the Max O'Dowd inspired 146 against Sri Lanka. That was their highest before today. And so after all those games, they suddenly score over 150 against South Africa. I mean, it's just, where do you go with those sorts of things? South Africa went home because essentially they couldn't chase the surprisingly high total of essentially the worst batting team left in this tournament. South Africa are going home because when they had a chance against Pakistan to ice that game, they let it go. You could argue they had two chances to ice the game against India as well, and almost let both of those go. The Pakistan one and the Zimbabwe one both had rain that affected them poorly. You know, obviously in the Zimbabwe game, they could have bowled Zimbabwe out for about 35 the way that they were bowling in that first innings. And then the rain came and the ball got slippery. And then eventually that World Cup game should not have even gone ahead. It should have been completely cancelled. And they kept trying to push it because the ICC wanted a result. And sadly, South Africa, couldn't get there. So it's rain, it's the inability to take your chances. But something really interesting happened in that Zimbabwe game that we haven't talked about enough. Zimbabwe were certainly time wasting, as almost any cricket team in the world would. And they were also falling over. I think some of those were legitimate and some weren't. There was so much time wasting going on. Even the ICC accidentally time wasted when they couldn't work out the DLS score quick enough, and you had Quinton de Kock standing at the crease in the rain waiting for the game to be restarted. Absolutely remarkable scenes. But there was a point where Shaun Williams had been pretty quiet on the field from what I could tell of watching, that game live. And eventually he turned to the umpire. And let's be honest, the conditions at the game at that point, you wouldn't play a club game in those conditions. It was too wet to play cricket. And Shaun Williams turned to the umpires and he said, "This is a World Cup." And it was just after that the game was called off. And I kept thinking about it now when he said that. Shaun Williams basically saying this is a World Cup. It means something different to a South African fan right now, right? I think this is a World Cup now means that their heartbreak is going to follow, right? That's what this is a World Cup means to South African fans. I made this video of Roelof van der Merwe, who's always been one of my favorite cricketers, and just showing his progression in this tournament. So we'll play that now, and then I'll come back and just chat a little bit more about South Africa. Van der Merwe trying to bat against Sri Lanka. The reason he's out there at all is because the Netherlands thought they had to win this game in order to qualify for the second round. You can see that Roelof is, broken. He shouldn't have been out in the middle. It honestly looked at times like he was going to give birth. You just don't see international players out on the field in this kind of pain that often. And the fact that he was still giving his all, despite the fact that it looks like he's passing all his kidney stones at the same time. Look at him trying to run. I mean, there's nothing of him. He's just completely broken. But he was giving his all because this meant everything to Netherlands cricket. And he wanted to be there and give them a chance to get to the second round. And it took him a while to recover. But of course, he would recover. And then he would play against South Africa. The South African team that he represented on 26 occasions from 2009 to 2010. And how well did he recover? Well, let's just check the tape, shall we? David Miller gets a top edge. Roelof van der Merwe is in the circle, and he runs back and takes this catch. There's something quite cruel about the fact that not even for the first time when South Africa has been sent home from a World Cup, it has been a South African player who has helped send them home. I don't know if it's choking, I don't know if it's a curse, I don't know what it is. But when South Africa come to World Cups, they seem to do fine unless they're wearing the South African shirts. So when I started my career, there was a couple of running jokes on Cricket with Balls. One was that the New South Wales cricket team was the most evil cricket team of all time, and the other one was that South Africa was the second most. And it's sort of, a lot of it just came from my fandom as a kid. They were the two teams that I didn't particularly like that much, and I thought it was good fun on the blog to have a go at them. But obviously, people wouldn't have known that I lived with South Africans. I studied with South Africans. I worked with South Africans. It was the first country that I ever wanted to visit when I was leaving Australia. And when I became a professional, even more so, they were one of the best teams to cover. I've loved talking to their current players, their former players. I've had, much more. If I ring up someone in South African cricket and say, "Can I get an interview with this player?" It's almost always given to me, and generally without the fuss of other teams too. Just suddenly you'll just have some famous player's phone number in your thing, and he'll be free from 11 to 11:30 if you can give him a call. And I think because I've been there, I was there as a fan from 92 onwards. Like, this is my era, right? From 92 through to now. The South African cricket team is my era. I wonder more and more, especially the older I get, just how you honestly live a life as a South African cricket fan, right? And I'm not even talking about the politics, the administration, the fact that they're selling, their domestic tournament away, anything like that. I just mean that when you get to a World Cup, how do you just follow that team? Because you can deal with a good team, right? And you can deal with a bad team. You can deal with an inconsistent team. Can you deal with a team that's really good, who then is always bad at that one big moment? Like, how does that deal with you psychologically? And it comes from the fact that the South African teams give their fans more than enough belief. AB de Villiers, Lance Klusener, Alan Donald, Sean Pollitt. These guys have hit these World Cups in peak form with everything behind them. And yet, if you're a fan now, let's say Dewalt Brevis is as good as we think he is. And this bowling attack of Ngidi, Nortje, Rabada get even better. And they keep finding players like this. The next World Cup, how do you emotionally deal with that as something when it comes up in your mind? And I was thinking about it a lot because the last game today was Zimbabwe, right? And there's 86,000 Indian fans at the MCG and 2,000 Zimbabwe fans. And Zimbabwe's getting smashed, and Sky's already hit them everywhere, and they've lost a bunch of wickets. And they just keep panning over to the Zimbabwean fans. And like they have been all tournament, whether they win or whether they lose, just absolutely enjoying it, because they're not celebrating Zimbabwean cricket, really, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they're celebrating their nation being at a World Cup. They're celebrating the success that their nation have had, even if, I don't know what would have to change for Zimbabwe ever to be a realistic chance of winning a World Cup. But it didn't matter, because there was absolute joy in just following their team at the World Cup. South Africa's a better team. They're a bigger country. They've had success in other sports and all this, and they will eventually have some kind of major success. They've already been the best test playing nation in the world for a good period of time, right? So it's not like there's nothing there. But when you come to a World Cup, I kept thinking, will a South African fan ever have that joy? Even if they won the next World Cup, they would only really get it when they won it. So they wouldn't feel it all the way through. Celebrating them as a team, there's just too much pressure of the amalgamation of the history and the heartbreak to really enjoy South Africa as a team. The only thing that you can take away at the moment is your country's in a World Cup and it's probably going to end poorly. I don't know how a fan gets around that, but it happened again. And I'd love to say that's the last time we'll see South Africa do that. And I've written many articles over the years about how, if you look back at some of those teams, there was always flaws in them. So we talk about choking, but we haven't always talked about, well, this team did this and this team did this. And if you have a look at the 92 World Cup, they were actually already behind the rate and they were going to struggle to win that anyway. And all those sorts of things. Everything I've said is true, right? But there's also something incredibly sad about watching Roelof van der Merwe run backwards out of the thing to another player from who was born in South Africa, bowling as well, take that incredible catch and just see that brilliant feat of athleticism and Colin Ackerman making runs against him and everything else, and just go, why does this keep happening? And how does it keep happening? And I suppose the most important question for any South African fan now is that it? Is that just what this is? Does South African cricket just continue to be this, or can it find something else at these World Cups? It is one of the most baffling curses, hoodoos, bad runs I've ever seen in professional sports. And I'm sure I'll do a proper video of it when when I have some of my breath back. Let's get on to the Dutch, though, because I think it's unfair not to mention them. For those who don't know much about Dutch cricket, it's really, really different to the rest of the cricket world, partly because they're not, from the Commonwealth. But there's also just other things. Like, for instance, when they beat England in 2009, before that World Cup, they would meet up in the hotel lobby, go out for their fitness training with like a big boombox to like a local park. Right? It's not how normal cricket teams prepare. Even now, as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty sure this is right, when they stay in a hotel, they make sure that the hotels give them, where possible, obviously, the biggest breakfast table available so that they can all eat together. And you'll be sitting there working with other teams or working as a journalist, I'm just looking over and just seeing a bunch of them all at the same table, enjoying themselves together. It's always felt to me that they do things completely their own way. And it's really worth looking at them beating South Africa now, but going back to the start of these two World Cups. They were absolutely horrible in that last World Cup. They're essentially out of the tournament in the first game when they lost 4 wickets in 4 balls to Curtis Kamfer. They then lost to Namibia before being dismissed for 44 runs against Sri Lanka. And I'm not misspeaking. I misspoke then. 44 runs is what they made in that last game of the previous World Cup. Since then, they've had the most remarkable summer of their life in the Netherlands. In one season, they had New Zealand, West Indies, Pakistan, and England come and play them. They've never had anything like that quality before, and they probably won't get it again with the World Super League being cancelled. Because of county cricket and injuries, though, they didn't actually have the full strength side that they would have wanted to have out there. So instead, they had to throw in a bunch of kids. We saw players like Baz de Leader and Tim Pringle doing really well. But we saw a lot of other younger players and inexperienced players really struggle. And it was rough. Netherlands lost all of those 11 games at home. And of course, the most embarrassing was when they allowed England to score 498, the world record ODI total. And if it wasn't for Logan van Beek's incredible 49th over or whatever it was, Netherlands would have actually been on the end of that first 500 run total. But that wasn't this team. Logan van Beek and Baz de Leader were the only bowlers, I think, from that game who actually who bowled in this tournament. And in this tournament, their bowling was just outstanding all the way through. Paul van Meekeren's late stage metamorphosis is incredible. He was good before. He seems to have hit a whole new level. Van Beek is one of those players who's just really solid and completely knows what his strengths are. Fred Klaassen, he's got some flaws within his game, but he's one of those players you think can take top order wickets against kind of any batting lineup in the world. Brandon Glover is still unfulfilled as a talent, but again, he's very much capable of taking a spree of wickets. You've got the canny spinners of Ackerman and Roelof, I'm giving a little bit. And all World Cup, this lot has just been very good. I mean, at times, Van Meekeren's been like a god tier talent. It's been ridiculous. And De Leader has produced more wickets than you'd expect from a young fifth option from an associate nation. And weirdly enough, I think it's kind of nice that after everything that has gone on, that this was the first time that Van Meekeren had a poor game and the rest of the bowlers actually stood up for him. But the truth is that no one was, even this as a bowling World Cup and everything else, no one was setting a world record against them in this World Cup. They just bowled too well all the way through. Unfortunately, though, the problems throughout the last 2 World Cups haven't been their bowling, it's been their batting. In the last World Cup, they didn't kind of bat at all. In this World Cup, they were awkward and tentative in chases. When they tried to bat first, it didn't really go all that much better. And we've been saying it all the tournament, really, and even in the pre-tournament chat. Their middle order had to arrive, and it's a really good middle order. Look at the names. This is over the last 2 World Cups. Roelof and Merwe, Tom Cooper, Ryan ten Skarta, Colin Ackerman, and Scott Edwards. All those players can score runs at top-level internationals. 4 of them are bang-on professional, experienced players. Probably 2 of them, well, Roelof's played for South Africa, and Ryan ten Skarta probably should have played for a major nation at one stage as well. They left South Africa too young, perhaps. And game after game, they produced absolutely nothing. And then to see them stand up today, and suddenly you saw the Netherlands as they should be fully formed. That the previous summer, they didn't have their best players. This World Cup, they had their bbest players, but they weren't making any runs. And then finally, you saw them today play exactly as they were. And of course, the pressure got to South Africa. And there's no doubt that all those things played a huge part. But on a very basic level, they played their best ever cricket in a game where they were playing a team who was much better than them, who needed to win. And Netherlands didn't. The only reason it matters to the Netherlands is because every game matters to the Netherlands, because they are fighting to become a test nation, to become a team that automatically qualifies for these events. And if you don't know much about the history of Dutch cricket, I did a podcast on it. So if you put in Netherlands Double Century Podcast, you'll be able to find it. Myself and Abhishek put that together. But in 1964, they beat an Australian team at home. Dutch players were good enough in the early 1900s for W.G. Grace to recruit them to his personal teams. Their women played a test match against South Africa. I think we sometimes like to think of this as a like a non-cricket country. There's a lot of cricket in this non-cricket country. And I'm just going to play something here of a couple of players. So this is O'Dowd, Van Meekeren, and Bas de Leader. And Muku will just play the video here. I think. Muku. There we go.
Goes big.
Oh, sorry, Muku. Can you just turn the sound off on that one? Thank you. Sorry, everyone. So this is the players so far. So 3 players, and I've picked these 3 players specifically. So it's O'Dowd, Van Meekeren, and Bas de Leader. And the reason that this team is written off so much by casual fans is we talk about team of expats. But these 3 players have been their best 3 players at this World Cup. And by a distance. O'Dowd is a Dutch Kiwi. He lived in Holland from the age of 6 to 12. As he told me, I didn't even know that he'd played cricket as a junior in the Netherlands, but he played 6 years of his early development in the Netherlands before going back to New Zealand. Van Meekeren has played in every age group level that I think Netherlands have. If they had an under-7s, he probably played in that. And Bas de Leader is not just a player who's played a bunch of age group cricket for the Netherlands, but he's from a father who also played cricket in the Netherlands, right? There's no doubt that they've still got players coming in from other nations. And they'll continue to do that because that's the sort of nation that Netherlands is as much as anything else. But you cannot deny that they have done absolutely great to actually develop some of their own local players. And it's weird enough that so many of those big name players from the other countries haven't been the players who have gone on to dominate for them. And there's another name here that we could throw in as well. And I want to tell you this story. I did a podcast a while back on the win when Netherlands beat England at Lord's. And one of the players I got in was Peter Saylor, who obviously went on to captain the Netherlands. And he's an accidental cricketer. He turned up at a football ground and people were playing cricket on one thing and he wasn't allowed to play in the football team. So he went and picked up cricket and then he got good at cricket because he's such a good athlete. And he would have been at this World Cup and probably captain if his back had held up. But unfortunately, he couldn't do it anymore and he had to quit. When he played at Lord's, Peter Saylor didn't own pads. Right, he'd come so much out of nowhere, and he had this natural left arm finger spin skill that allowed him to bowl in the death at Lord's. Again, he bowled in the death at Lord's in that T20 as a left arm finger spinner, partly because he wasn't clever enough to tell his captain that he shouldn't be bowling in that part of the game as a left arm finger spinner. There's certainly something to Dutch cricket that I think gets overlooked sometimes. And it's why I've done a couple of podcasts on it. And the one thing I would say is that they have a history and they have a present within our game. And I think when we see days like this, we hope that then there is also some kind of a future as well. But what a game for them. Hopefully it will stay with people for a long, long time. It is one of the sunniest days in Dutch cricket. I don't think they didn't just beat a test playing nation, which I think is big. I think they beat a test playing nation in the second round that they have direct links to. And there'll be a lot of talk about just how much South Africa choked. But remember who the team was who was good enough to put their hands around their neck in the first place. And also remember that even if we want to dwell on South Africa, this is a huge moment for Netherlands cricket. And we should definitely bring them as many flowers as possible for what was another remarkable moment in a remarkable World Cup. All right. Shall we move on to Pakistan? So they're in the semi-finals. And, I don't know what the Pakistan government should be gifting the Netherlands cricket team at the moment, but all the coaches and bowling machines that you have available to you. They were effectively out of the tournament, Pakistan, after the Pak Bean fiasco. And here they are. I mean, it's pure, uncut Pakistan, back from the brink, just when it seemed all was lost. And in this one, it's even more random because they had nothing to do with the final sort of thing. I mean, they had to beat Bangladesh, of course, but you know what I mean. They had nothing to do with the reason that they got in. It was completely out of their hands. After I'd already made this video about how random their unlikely losses were. They somehow were even more unlikely and even more random in the way that they managed to stay in the World Cup. It'll be really interesting to see how they go from here on in, because they should play with an incredible amount of freedom. Their bowling still looks really potent, and their batting has mostly found a way, despite the fact that they did forget to pack their openers before they came over. If they're ever going to get, and the Iftikhar and Yadav, playing really, really good cricket, a couple of really good knocks and some good bowling from Yadav as well in there. Shan Masood is still holding up an end, and Mohammad Harris, who's come from nowhere to into the 11 with 5 PSL games in between him. And we saw him in the first game be really good, and he made a vital 31 from 18 here. He's just a bit of electric ness. And it was funny, a lot of people were talking to me about Fakhar Zaman being, another attacking player. But when you look at Fakhar Zaman's T20 record, he's not quite the dynamic player we quite often see in one-day cricket. And it would make more sense from a strategic vantage to have Baba and Rizwan separated slightly and have Harris open the batting, because then you have the dependability of still getting your runs if that's the tactic that you want, but you have the ability, hopefully 1 in 3 games, for Mohammad Harris to go completely nuts and give you the chance to score those 180, 190, 200, 210 totals, because you have the really good start. It's a really good mix, and it's sort of come from nowhere. But yeah, it's the victory, of course, in this particular game, though, as much as we could talk about the batting, was probably more set up by the bowling, because they're a bowling team. Shadab Khan took 2 crucial wickets in 2 balls, just as Bangladesh had got to 73 for 1, even if we'll get to the Shakib LBW later. But it was a huge turning point in the innings, and we've seen Shadab Khan do that a couple of times so far in the tournament so far. And also Shaheen Afridi, has had a bit of probably more of a quiet start to the tournament than we would have thought. And so far, in this game, 4 for 22, went at less than a run a ball, and bowled very, very good at times in this game. Pakistan are now going to go up against New Zealand. Pakistan-New Zealand semi-final seem, I don't know, because Pakistan is the team that sort of wins when you least expect it. And New Zealand is the team that sort of makes the finals, but you don't expect them to win. It's got some sort of, either there's going to be another weird twist because it's this tournament, or it'll go exactly to plan. I can't even work out what will happen in that particular game, but it should be a very fascinating matchup. India, they win and qualify, although they qualified, India, and then they won. incredible to think how much has gone on in the day that India qualifying for the World Cup is like, it's almost an afterthought, right? Like South Africa, Netherlands, you could even put Zimbabwe ahead. I've got something for Zimbabwe at the end, but even Zimbabwe's last game, India for the first time in this tournament is just not the talking point. But yes, they managed to qualify before they went out on the field, which is always the best way of qualifying, as I think South Africa have completely proven. And maybe England proved as well in their game. You don't want a shaky qualification game, do you? India were given the occasional wobble by Zimbabwe, I suppose, but then Sky continued with his fantastic tournament, 61 from 25. They ended up setting 186, and that was always going to be beyond Zimbabwe's batters. I'll get to it later, but had Zimbabwe made slightly less runs, had India made slightly less runs as it looked like was possible at times, that's the sort of total, that sort of middling total that Zimbabwe, 155, 160-ish, that they can inch towards. This was just a little bit too much. But all in all, India played the way they have been playing, which is, they've seemed to have adjusted to the conditions in this tournament that probably them... I would have said South Africa, but maybe I was wrong about South Africa. But certainly them and New Zealand seem to be the two teams that sort of adjusted the best to, actually, this is a slightly different tournament. We're going to play it in just a different style. Pant coming in for Karthik, I think was quite interesting as well. KR Raul made runs again. Kohli got the ball away. Lots of good signs from that point of view. And obviously their bowlers did very well, but yeah, Zimbabwe were never going to make, it was just too many runs for Zimbabwe. They'd have to take too many chances to be able to do that. Arshdeep and Bhuvi were very economical. They're both swinging the ball in both directions, which is a really weird, so this is the kind of thing that we didn't really have on our list before this World Cup, which is why you can do all the preparations you want. And then I think it was Baz the leader. Is another interesting one here. When I've been watching clips of Baz the leader ball, his slow ball is really good. And 4 months ago, when I was watching him, well, it's probably less than that now. It's probably 3 months ago. I was thinking this guy will be good if he ever gets a slower ball. And he didn't really have a good one then. And it seems that he's already worked that out. And you see with Arshdeep as well, another young player, being able to swing the ball both ways, that's a huge advantage because you can't line it up. If it's swinging away, you can play with the swing. If someone can swing it in both directions, it just makes it so much more tricky for anyone there. Shami and Pandey got a couple of wickets. Ashwin cleaned up. He got 1 wicket with the ball almost rolled along the ground. I should have taken a video of that. I really like that. Also like his reaction of that's basically the same reaction I have when I get a wicket with the ball runs along the ground. So it's nice to see. He really is like, I was thinking about this the other day. Ashwin's almost like the super great club cricketer because he's not built like an athlete, and he's got lots of interests off the field, and obviously educated and all that sort of stuff. And you watch him play, and he sort of plays like a really smart club cricketer who just happens to be an absolute freak genius bowling level player, and the way he bats as well. I think he's a really enjoyable player if you've ever played a lot of club cricket, if that makes sense. But India qualify. That's all you need to know, really. The Dutch, let's just get on to their batting a little bit, because, I mentioned it before that their batting has been terrible. So coming into this game, the Netherlands had only made one score of over 135 in this tournament. And that was really because Max O'Dowd hit a bunch of sixes at the end to get them there when they'd already pretty much lost that game. So they made 158 today. And the tone was set in the power play. Rabada and Ngidi were taken down, conceding 37 runs from their 3 overs. So they've changed their top order of the Netherlands a little bit in this World Cup. So they started off with Vikramjit Singh opening with O'Dowd and Baz the leader at 3. So 2 young players, unproven. Baz the leader is a good hitter of the ball, but in a World Cup, that was a step up. Vikramjit, I still think is a good player, but I always thought this was going to be a World Cup too early for him. And he just hasn't been able to get away the better bowlers consistently, but there's still something for him. But they went back to Stefan Myburg, who, the grand old man of Dutch cricket, right? When you think of Myburg, you really think of, names like, Scafuri and Boren and those sorts of guys. That's his generation. And yet here he is still playing. And he set them up with a 37 from 30. I've got a cool little graph on the Dutch batters here. This is the last 2 World Cups, and I've done this by batting position, but I had to change up the opener a little bit. So Max O'Dowd has made 29.3% of their runs over the last 2 World Cups. Look, we've given him enough flowers. I'm not even going to put up another picture of Max O'Dowd as Thor at this point. We're just going to push him to the side for a minute. But if you just have a look, the other opener obviously hasn't made anywhere near enough runs as an opener. Number 3 spot, they've got a little bit of runs out of. Number 4 spot, a little bit more, but still they're both below where you would want. Number 5 just hasn't made any runs for them. And if you have a look all the way around at number 11, number 5's made barely more than double what they've got from their number 11 position in this World Cup. And number 11 doesn't bat in every game as well, of course, where number 5 bats in a lot more games. It just tells you that middle order, as strong as it has been, has just not done nothing. And obviously, Max O'Dowd has done everything in this World Cup for them. So in the 7 game, and we just look at this, so those are the last 2 World Cups, but if we just look at this edition of the World Cup, Tom Cooper had made 72 runs in the World Cup so far, and 32 of those came in the last match against Zimbabwe. But that did seem like he got a little bit more form. So he made 35 from 19 today. He took down Markram and Maharaj, and he's not always someone who attacks the spinners particularly well, Tom Cooper. But he ended up with 33% of his runs in the tournament from today's game. And it wasn't just him, because Colin Ackerman, who made runs, who did he make a 60-odd against? Which game was that? One of the early games, I can't remember, but Ackerman made some runs. It was a game they should have won. Sorry, I should have remembered that. But Ackerman had made a bunch of runs in one game, and again ended up making almost a quarter of his World Cup runs in that game today. So he made 41 from 26, and he's the sort of player that can do this. Both of these players, they're solid professionals. They should have been better. And how lucky for Netherlands cricket that they both came good at the same time, and that allowed them to have this incredible win. If we're going to talk about them, though, we have to talk about the South African batting. When I did my power rankings, you remember that I said that I had concerns about South Africa's batting. Their top order was not as strong as some of the other frontline teams, some of the other favourites for this World Cup. And they had a weakness at number 7 and potentially even at number 6, because they had the younger player there. There's nothing wrong with Stubbs. He'll be a fantastic player. This is why I talk about not pushing younger players into World Cups, though, because it's a completely different environment. I'm not, Mohamed Harris has done great, and Tim Pringle for Netherlands has done great. But Baz the leader didn't, struggled a little bit with the bat. And Vikramjit for the Netherlands struggled with the bat. And we've seen other younger players, just come into the side and struggle in World Cups because it's hard. It's a different kind of environment. And I think South Africa certainly saw what I was talking about, and they played Klaasen over Stubbs today, opting for just a little bit more experience in that side. For those who don't know, Parnell bats at 7. He has, I think he averages around 20 in T20 internationals, but at a strike rate of 96. He's a little bit better than that in domestic cricket. And he certainly, I think some of those numbers were from probably when he was a little bit younger. But he's not a number 7 at this level. And so it means that if they don't get the majority of their of any chase or any total 2 and 3 wickets down, suddenly it gets very, very tense, and you're hoping that Parnell, Maharaj, Rabada, none of which are genuine all-rounders, they all have a little bit of batting talent, but there's a lot to expect there. So if you look at the strike rates today, you can also just see the tentative nature of the South Africans. So these are all the players who made 10 runs or more. So you can see that there's 3 Dutch players up at the top of the strike rates, and you can see where the majority of the South Africans are. That's the kind of tension you play with when you're in a must-win game, when the opposition's got slightly more runs than you expect. Probably also the opposition bowlers are bowling slightly better than you would traditionally expect them to, and you put yourself into that sort of situation. Also, Charlie pointed out to me that you look at Riley Rousseau's innings against Bangladesh, and perhaps that carried some of the early thoughts we had about South African batting, and that was kind of a one-off knock where he did so much. There's a question I've had in the chat that we'll get to later as well, where someone was asking about Quinton de Kock as a batter as well. But there's the Temba Bavuma thing. I mean, there's 2 parts of the Temba Bavuma one is you can make a very good argument that he shouldn't be in the side because he's not in their top 6 T20 batters. But you could also make a very good argument that even if he was, he's not in particularly good form. He's not been making runs of recent times. When he was in brilliant form, this wouldn't have been as much of a problem. And this is the kind of chase where he's a very handy player to have. But it wasn't just that. It just felt like everyone was scoring at a run of ball. Or going, or not really going anywhere. Plus, they just consistently lost wickets as well. So any chance that they really had died in the 16th over when Roelof took that catch that I showed you before of Miller, and then Wayne Parnell going for a duck as well. Maharaj, again, and we've seen this, he has improved so much as a batter, but he was not fully fit out there and was hopping around and, he was out there for the same reason that Roelof was out there in that game against Sri Lanka for the Netherlands. It's because they were trying to hit boundaries and save themselves in the World Cup. In the end, South Africa fall 13 runs short of the Dutch. If you can't chase, for all due credit goes to the Dutch batters in this particular case, and certainly the Dutch bowlers all the way through the tournament. But if you can't chase that total against the Dutch team, you probably don't deserve to go through to the semi-finals. That said, that put Pakistan through, and they failed to chase even less against Zimbabwe. So it's been the tournament of the underdog, and eventually, South Africa got bitten by that one as well. Let's move on to the Dutch bowlers. I'm a massive fan, obviously. I just think it's been a fantastic tournament all the way through. I'm just going to bring up this guy. Yeah. So these are the highest wicket takers in the tournament so far. So you can see the big circles, those two big circles. That's Van Meekeren at the front, and the big orange circle at the back there is Bas de Leede, who's been a little bit more expensive, although you expect that as a fifth option. But you've also got Glover and Klaassen on this list. I think just the fact that there are so many Dutch players on this list. And yes, they played more games than everyone else, but this is a lot of wickets to be taken. And if you look at someone like Glover, he's on this list already, and he came into the tournament very late. I think that, you look at today and you do see, Klaassen taking the wicket of de Kock early on, and then later Markram, and he took 2 for 20. Brandon Glover, He's now got 7 wickets. 3 of them came today. He got Riley Rousseau and then bowled the over that got rid of Miller and Parnell that we talked about before. And also just the spinners. Colin Ackman's probably bowled more than he thought he would. So he bowled 3 overs just for 16 runs, partly because Roelof couldn't always bowl in this tournament because of his injuries. And of course, Bas de Leede, who currently... Well, he's the second orange dot. I realised accidentally shortened out the names there, but he's the second orange line there. He has the second most wickets in this tournament. To have a young Dutch-born player with the second most wickets, who's not a specialist bowler, who also got hit in the face earlier in the tournament and is lucky to be still bowling at all. I think that's just a huge thing. I think a lot of people, I contacted an agent almost the first time I saw him play and said to the agent, I don't know who he signed with, but you should be signing this kid up. Within 5 months of that Netherlands summer, he was signed up for the Emirates team, the Emirates Mumbai team. I'm not sure what his ceiling is, but there aren't many guys in the world who can touch 90 miles an hour and also bat top 3. And his development's going to be really, really interesting over the next couple of years because he's played so much cricket at the associate level and at home. How is he going to develop when he goes off into the world on his own? But he's a fantastic talent. And I just think it's great. This particular game, though, just a great all-round performance by the Dutch team. They're brilliant in the power play when they were bowling against South Africa. And I think for the Dutch bowlers, Van Meekeren got a lot of the attention because he's been brilliant, and Bas de Leede has obviously taken a lot of wickets. But for them as a group, it was a great way for them to finish this tournament, and also awesome that their batters really backed them up in this one game, and so that they get to go away. Otherwise, people like me would be talking up their bowling, but who else would remember it in a couple of years, right? But the fact that they backed it up by beating South Africa, this game doesn't go away now, and this is another really good building block for Dutch cricket. All right, should we move on to Sky? He played a fantastic innings today. For those who don't know, Richard Ngavara had been going at less than a run a ball in the death so far. So I think he'd been going at about 5.6 runs and over in the death. And also, it's worth saying, I think he bowled the most balls in the death as well. So it wasn't from a small sample size. He'd done it in the group game. Oh, sorry, the requalifying tournament at the start, and then in the group rounds as well. Fantastic bowling performance from him all the way through. And good teams haven't been able to get him away. Today, in his last 2 overs, he went for 33 runs. In that, you could see still his skill and what he was trying to do. And it's just that Sky came up with a method of sweeping the ball, essentially, from wide outside off stump. And that was the ball that Ngava's had so much success with so far. And just to show you exactly what I mean by this, because, you say, oh, Zimbabwe have been bowling well at the death. What does that mean? Well, it means that coming into this game, they had the 3rd best economy rate of any team at the death. Now, some of that was boosted by those early games, especially in Hobart, where it wasn't always particularly easy to get away with it. Plus, I didn't have to bowl in the death against South Africa. That might have been a different situation. But if you've been watching this tournament, you know that these numbers hold up. They have been fantastic so far in this tournament. And Sky completely ruined them. So I think on this, they're going at about 7.4 runs and over, maybe, or 7.2 runs and over. And Sky added 1.2 runs and over to their overall total in 4 overs. So just absolutely brilliant batting from him. And look, I could tell you about it all you want, but in this particular case, I think it's just worth watching him play this innings, and you get the full sense of just how brilliant he was. So Muku, could you play that tape for me, please?
Oh, it's gone over the keeper. Away it goes. Don't know how 56s in a calendar year. There it goes again. It'll be 2 4s in a row. Garava. Oh dear.
Some taking in this crowd noise. Superb though. Superb.
He can play shots like this, so he's difficult to contain. Shaw. Oh, yes. Oh, what a shot. What a shot this. Nobody out there. That's why he's playing it in that. A roar in the MCG. Goes even finer. You have to be.
Yeah, I don't know, has he made 3 scores this tournament? And I think we've ended up playing the highlights every time. I mean, sometimes we've mixed and matched it and I've done some analysis or whatever. But it's like, you watch that innings, it's just a perfect combination of innovation, timing, and skill. And probably belief is probably the other thing. When the 15th over had been delivered, I would have said that the average total would have been around 160. Because it's India, maybe you think 165. And because of what he did, they made 186. And he did it against Zimbabwe's strength. I mean, their seam bowling at the death has been really something special in this tournament. And at 160, Zimbabwe had a chance of winning that game. They probably still wouldn't have, but they had a chance of winning that game. By 186, they didn't. And the difference was Sky. All right, let's go to Bangladesh. Bangladesh, where's my Bangladesh notes? So 3 balls into the 11th over against Pakistan, and they were 73 for 1. In a winner takes all game, they had Pakistan rattled, right? And then came the over where it all fell apart for them. Sorry about that. Suryakumar was out trying to reverse sweep Yadav. Fine, it's a perfectly normal thing. And then a ball later, Psyche was struck in front for LBW, but he was a long way down the wicket. Hawkeye said it was more than 3 meters when he called for the review. Though that was probably more of a minor gripe compared with the fact that it clearly seemed to hit his bat on the way through to the pads. The third umpire ruled the spike was on ultra edge. But let's just play the video so you can have a good look at the entire situation.
Now. That's very close. Where was the impact? Was it in the line of the stumps it's been given? Can he contribute with a bat now? That's very close. Where was the impact? Was it in the line of the stumps it's been given? Brilliant bowling here from Yadav.
Front on coming up, Adrian. Ball is close to the bat. Let's go to alter age to confirm if there's any bat.
So yeah, that's the only clip that we have there, but it was very unfortunate. The bat doesn't appear to touch the ground in that particular one. Also, there's one thing I want to say, because this came out in the other game when a bunch of decisions went against Bangladesh in the previous game. And the first thing is, all the decisions go in favor of India. And, I get direct messages from very angry Bangladesh fans saying, you don't understand, India fixes all these games against us. Here's a big moment, a really big moment for Bangladesh cricket. And it went in the favor of Pakistan, right? And the other thing is, as I pointed out, umpires make mistakes all the time. This idea that just because we're all watching the video, we all see the same thing. It's not really how things happen. People still see the video in different ways. And, it's also, the whole thing's butterfly effect anyway. We don't know how the game would have gone if that had not happened. But from that point onwards, we do know how it went with that decision, which is that Bangladesh added 55 in the final 9.1 overs. And it's a shame, because I think Bangladesh were making this into an interesting game. Shanto continued his encouraging tournament with his 54. I think that's his second half century in 3 games. But sloppy fielding didn't particularly help them either. Rizwan was dropped in the first over when they really needed early wickets specifically. Nasim Ahmed and Mustafiza were both quite economical, but they didn't really have the runs to go for. Usually I would do an exit interview. I'm not sure when I'm going to get a chance to be able to do that specifically for this team. Or for a couple of teams. Zimbabwe is probably another one. South Africa is probably one now as well. But it's a really curious tournament for Bangladesh, because I feel like I saw a lot of good signs. They nearly won probably the hardest game that they went up against in India. And they came a win away from beating Pakistan there as well. But they actually only beat Netherlands and Zimbabwe. And even then, took a couple of swipes to beat Zimbabwe as well. They've ended up finishing 5th in their group, which could be really important for them going forward as well. But I did feel like at times in this tournament, they played with a freedom that I hadn't seen in T20 cricket before. So hopefully that is a sign of good things to come. All right, shall we finish up with Zimbabwe? Ryan Bell made runs today, and he's basically become the face of Zimbabwean cricket over the last year or so. First was the tweet about his shoes, so maybe he's the feet of Zimbabwean cricket, and then it was the hat trick against Australia. But this has not been his World Cup. His leg spin's barely being used, partly because the pitchers haven't really asked for leg spin, and also because Sikandar Raza has been bowling so well, he's sort of taken away some of Bell's extra wickets. And he's been pushed down the order a couple of times. His batting hasn't been as impactful. He hasn't really failed, but he also hasn't scored at a very good rate. So coming into this game, he'd scored 66 runs from 75 balls, right? So he really hadn't had much of an impact. And then you see today, and he made 35 runs from... 35 runs from, how many balls was it? So I can't read any of my own numbers here. 22 balls, right? And it's obviously wasn't going to be the difference, but it was a really important innings, and it gave them, my big worry was they were going to get bowled out for 80 or 90 swinging really hard. I just wanted them to put on a proper total, show all the way through to the end that this was a legitimate team. And I think his innings allowed that. And in the 8 games, when you look at them, so many players have stood up for them at different times. Obviously, Sikandar Raza has hogged the limelight with just an incredible World Cup campaign. But, and he might end up with an IPL spot off the back end of this as well. Maybe just on the bench, but making runs against India today was quite handy from that point of view. But if you have a look at it, whether it be Chakavra's keeping, like the stumping against Shan Masood, Chitara's composure at many times with the ball, Even like someone like Jongwei, who didn't have a great tournament, comes up with a surprise wicket that really helped them against Pakistan. I think you've got the experience and nous of Irvine and Williams, who seem to have played a million games of cricket between them. Evans comes out of nowhere in his first World Cup, has to then bowl the most important over, 81 days into his international career against Pakistan. You've got Blessing's power play bowling, which has been absolutely incredible. Mad Havir's wet knock against South Africa, which probably saved them the points in that particular game in the end. Ngava's beautiful death bowling all the way through. They've just had so many different people stand up. And I sent a tweet about them that went viral, and it upset people outside the Zimbabwean cricket community, as reached Zimbabwe as a nation. And in it, part of the reason was because I was talking about how great it was they'd won, but I also mentioned that they'd had to overcome the fixing and the suspension and all the other things that have happened of recent times. And I get that if you're a Zimbabwean person, your team has just had a great day, and some random guy is pointing out all the negative shit that's going on. But I do those sorts of things on purpose. It's not an accident, right? It's like when I was talking about how great the Dutch had been, I wanted to show you where they had come from. The 498 game, not winning a game at home, not even having their full strength team, having a terrible World Cup through to beating South Africa in this game. It's important. And you look at players, especially like Raza and Williams and Irvine, but kind of all the players in Zimbabwe, the talent is clearly there. And the talent has never gone away. What's gone away is the environment. Right, and these players, the life of these players who've been around Zimbabwe cricket for a long time, they have lived Zimbabwean cricket in its darkest days. Right, that their friends getting suspended, done for corruption, and their mentors getting done for corruption, their team getting suspended. Right, them having to ask for boots, all these sorts of things. That is their lived experience. In order to fully understand how great their World Cup has been, you have to understand everything that they had to overcome to even be here. And then I thought the win for them was them getting to this tournament. I'm not even sure what I had as the best case scenario. Maybe it was sneaky into the second round, but I think it was probably just the win was them getting here. But they then continued to play on. No one would have had any problems with Zimbabwe if they played in, the 3 games, struggled a little bit and left. Right? Even if they hadn't have won a game. Instead, they shocked a test team in their first round. Then they got cold reality against another one. And then to qualify, they had to beat a very professional Scottish team who was in fairly good form all the way through. All right. Then their worst game was the swimming pool match against South Africa. They're probably, as a team, are always going to have to live with the fact that they had 2 chances off the last ball to beat Bangladesh and still couldn't do it. They lost to the Netherlands, which again is a game that's going to stay with them for a while. And then you have the game against India, which they kept themselves in until Sky completely took it away from them. But then you think about that Pakistan game, right? At the halfway point of that, it looked as inevitable a result as any game with Pakistan ever could, right? But Zimbabwe didn't think about it that way. And they didn't play that way. And they kept finding ways to put pressure on Pakistan all the way through. And they won a game that most major nations, I think, would have probably lost. And look, we can give as much credit as we want to Secunda Raza. And I want to mention one particular thing, that he was absolutely top tier with bat and with ball. And it is one of the great all-round performances at a World Cup. And, you fit it in wherever you want. Lance Kluser in 99 and Kapil Dev in 83 and, Sanjay Surya in 96. There's been some really good all-round performances in World Cups before. But Secunda Raza certainly deserves to be in a conversation of that, because it was an absolutely ridiculous series that he had. But the important thing to note is you've got here a player who was always really talented. But what's he done of recent times, right? He is an aging vet who decided to get better by making the most out of himself. And he upskilled himself. With his batting, he freed himself with the help of their coach, Dave Houghton, who deserves a ton of credit here. And then with his bowling, he just went off and he worked out a method that would make him more useful, right? And the reason I bring that up is, if you look at Zimbabwe, that's essentially what they did all the way through this World Cup. That's the cricket side of things. I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to show you the last minute and a half or so of the game against Pakistan, so you can see the emotional sides and what this meant to Zimbabwe fans, and also the Zimbabwe cricket team.
Oh, how Zimbabwe would love this for a skull. New man on strike. It's Shahinsha Afridi, and he can blast it. You know that. Here's Evans. It's gonna be one. Will it be two? It won't be, because he's grabbed it. Man, oh man! Heart-stopping stuff, I tell you. But what a victory for Zimbabwe! They've fought and fought, and finally managed to get home. What a win by just one run.
Not many were giving them the chance, but it's been absolutely superb. And this World Cup has just kept on giving and giving. What a game of cricket we've had.
What did I tell you? We did it! I'm feeling amazing! You know what? This is so amazing. We can actually beat it. You know that? We can do it. Yeah! I'm feeling great, man. Winning to the last goal.
First game of live sport ever, Zimbabwe!
Man.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I didn't win the World Cup, right? But what a moment for them. Sorry, it chokes me up a little bit. I suppose the one thing I'm going to add is, as a child of 90s cricket, everyone loved Zimbabwe. That was just my memory of them. They were such a popular team. And this is the first time I really feel like the new generation is getting to see them. And they're wonderful. All right, let's get on to your questions. That part of the show. Oh, thank you, Mukunda. Tom says, do you think the seam-friendly pitches have contributed to small teams being so competitive with the larger ones? No, because I think that at a very basic point, you have to have good seam bowlers. I think I talked about this earlier, Tom. It might have even been on yesterday's show. They're showing footage of Alex Cusack bowling and taking a bunch of wickets for Ireland in an early T20 game. In a game that we're watching Josh Little bowl at 90 miles an hour left-arm pace, right? Things have changed. And, you know, that I think we are seeing, you know, guys like Little and Van Meekeren are incredibly important. You know, and that they exist. And it's not the first time. You know, we had Ole Mortensen from Denmark years ago. And, you know, we've had other, Amjad Khan as well, you know, coming through from Denmark. And, you know, random fast bowlers on occasion coming from some of these other countries. But I do think that for whatever reason, we had Zimbabwe, Ireland, even Scotland have a decent bowling lineup, even if it didn't get them through the next round. Namibia have a very good bowling lineup as well. These are teams with good bowling lineups already, seam bowling lineup specifically. And then on top of that, they got conditions that helped them. But those conditions also should have helped the other team. The only thing I would say when it comes to the friendly pitches, so I'll take away seam friendly, but this has been a lower scoring World Cup. And I think that when you have a lower scoring World Cup, there are a lot of teams who just can't hang once you score over 160, 180, 100. It's just too many runs for them to score. You bring those scores down, and those scrappy teams like Namibia and Netherlands and Zimbabwe are much more in it. I mean, Ireland's probably one of the few teams that has the ability to score, and maybe Scotland at their best as well, that can really score a high score. I think a lot of those other teams just don't have it within them. So having it as a bowler-friendly World Cup, I think helped from that perspective. Imad says, do you think India should replace either Akshar or Ashwin with Harshal in the knockouts? Well, they're playing at Adelaide Oval, so traditionally that's a pretty good place for spin. I'd have to have a look at all the matchups and go all the way through it. I barely got through these games. I mean, that was the longest episode we've done. That was like an hour of me talking straight. So sorry if I put some of you to sleep. But off the top of my head, I would say no. Harshal's a really interesting one because before this tournament, I would have thought, really, he should have a good tournament. He gets a lot of dip on the ball. And in Australian grounds, that means that you're going to spoon him up to long on and long off and deep mid wicket quite a lot because they're bigger grounds. And I know he also gets sideways movement, which you get a bit less of in Australia. But I really thought that in some ways, Harshall's a very similar bowler to Dwayne Bravo, slightly different physically and everything else. But their general nearest neighbour skill sets are the amount of dip they get on the ball and the fact that their faster ball is a little bit quicker than you expect it to be. But this has not been a World Cup for that kind of bowler. Do we have even Mustafiza? I don't have the numbers to hand, but he's cut down the amount of slower balls he's been bowling. So I think he was usually up at around 60 to 70% slower balls. And I think in this World Cup, it was closer to 30 or 35%. I think someone was telling me the other day. So I'm not sure that in that particular case, Harshall is the best bet. But look, I would have loved to, if this had been a big bash type of World Cup, I would have loved to have seen Harshall play in it. I'm not sure he's particularly suited to that as it stands at the moment. But if they do want the extra seamer, I mean, that's kind of what he does, right? Sia Square says, do you see Netherlands being made a full member in the future, beating not one but two full member teams? Quite an achievement, and the ICC should be looking to grant them. I don't think the ICC is looking at giving full member status to anyone else at the moment. I think it brings more complications. I worry about Netherlands being... I worry about the professionalism of the Netherlands off the field becoming a full member team in the way that Ireland were very well prepared for it and were trying to bring their players back home and try and keep the talent pool available to them. At the moment, I don't think Netherlands cricket would generate enough money in order to pay their players more than county cricketers or to get their players back from county cricket. Obviously it would be huge for them. It's interesting because in the old days, that's what would happen, right? Which is the only team really who was very successful at a World Cup or two World Cups was Kenya, who didn't get test playing status. Every other team did well at a World Cup and eventually got their test playing status. So with that in mind, Netherlands is on that track, but it's not quite how we look at things anymore, right? It does seem that has changed a little bit, especially with T20 cricket. I think the professionalism of Dutch cricket needs to change quite a bit. The problem with that is I don't see how it changes without intervention from the government or sponsorship. And the truth is that while Dutch cricket, it's one of those things that's really big, but in a really small space. And how it gets out to the wider community and makes more money in the future, I don't know. But these sorts of things help, right? Beating South Africa will probably be quite a big deal within Netherlands for the next couple of days. Having those big couple of wins that they've had can really help them. But I don't see this as being a catalyst for them being the next test nation. I think everyone should have test status. So let's put that aside because it's nonsense that we just decide who does and who doesn't. We should have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, all that sort of stuff. But putting that aside, if you're going to give a team a test status, I actually think the more important thing is not their individual results in white ball tournaments. What is their setup? What is the professionalism? How are they developing their talent? Now, in that case, they might point to Vikramjit Singh and Baz de Leader and Paul van Meekeren and go, wow, are we not doing a good job? But I think if you put independent evaluators in Dutch cricket, I think it would be fair to say that they're a long way off where Ireland were, and they don't have the playing pool available to them that Afghanistan did. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's ridiculous to think how few test playing nations we have and how we've set that up. But that's a conversation for another day. Who we got next? Vamos says, I'm aware of South Africa's complex and oppressive past. Would you want to tinker with South Africa's transformation quotas in any way to balance social justice and sporting glory? Well, here you go. I've talked about this a lot. There's a video on the site about it when Quinton de Kock refused to kneel. I'm not a big fan of quotas. What you have to do if you want to address this balance really, and I'm not saying that quotas should disappear. There's a reason they exist and they matter. And all those people who say it doesn't matter, it's just not true, right? Have a look at Giannis playing in the NBA and listen to his story of why he wanted to play in the NBA. He saw another young black person playing in the Greek team, and he was like, oh, well, if he can play basketball, I can play basketball. These things matter, right? Separate to that, though, what I would say is that you have to look at how South Africa are producing cricketers. If you are just putting a system in where you are trying to cherry pick the best players and then suddenly put a bunch of them in professional teams, whether it be in first class cricket or in test cricket, based on their skin color or their ethnicity or whatever you're doing, and you're not actually fundamentally looking at the reason why young black players aren't developing, and you're not growing that. I have said for, I don't know, almost a decade now that South Africa has the best school system in the world when it comes to producing professional cricketers. If the government was absolutely serious about fixing the problem, what they would do is they would set up professional schools for the best kids in South Africa to play cricket in. And they would mimic the best schools. They would even try and get some of those coaches across, and they would get all the best athletes from across South Africa and chuck them into the school. It doesn't even need to be a cricket-specific school. You could do it for so many different things. And you could have the sporting excellence schools that wouldn't just produce South African cricketers. It would produce analysts, coaches, commentators, writers. It would change the direction of the sport in that country. And I don't even think it would just change cricket there. So I don't think you can keep having a situation where realistically there is a class barrier in South Africa as much as there is a race barrier. Have a look at Rabada's past. Right? He's a, was it a neurosurgeon and a lawyer or a CEO, whatever his parents are, is a class problem there. And we know that this is what has happened with South African cricket from the beginning. They are absolutely brilliant at producing these cricket schools. And we've had cricket schools where like 10, you've had 2 school teams where like 10 people have gone on to play first class cricket. They're that strong, these schools. You need to mimic that and then take the best of that and actually start to put it to the people who are never going to get to that level. And it needs to be, if you're talking about quotas matter more between the age of 12 and 17 when players are developing. Trying to get a player in who hasn't been developed correctly for many different reasons, and then trying to get them to play against someone else who's been in the best environment, who's had access to cricket as a young age, whose parents play. It's not the same. You need to change the entire system. And they're not going to do it because they don't want to. That's not how politicians work, right? Politicians, imagine spending millions and millions of dollars and their first 10 years, they don't produce a test player, right? They would be beside themselves. But that's where I think the issue is. And I think there are many issues within South African cricket, but I also think South African cricket's done wonderful things over the last couple of years. There's a lot more to be done. And I think making short-term decisions on quotas and all those sorts of things, I get it. And I see how it can work. And maybe one day it will. But, it just seems to me that rugby has done better than cricket. And that cricket has a template of how it can fix itself in South Africa. But they're still producing incredible talent. So, look at their bowlers coming through at the moment. And, it's a bit of a down period for batting, but Brevis might fix that, right? But for bowling, there's a lot of talent there. So let's not pretend that everything is to do with those sorts of things. Suresh says, did you think Netherlands had it in them? I know you said 10% chance. Was this a surprise to you? I think it surprised me less than most people. So someone asked me about it on Twitter before I came on the video yesterday. And I said 10% chance. And I did think about it quite a bit. I tried to play the game out in my head, simulate it quite a few times. And I came up with 10% chance based on what I thought Netherlands' strengths were and what I thought South Africa's weaknesses were. Then I came onto the video yesterday and I said 10%, and then I sort of hedged and I said 5% chance, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, somewhere around that, probably in the middle. It's probably 7.5% chance. But it was specifically based on the fact that I thought that if Netherlands bowlers could create pressure, and because they specifically take a lot of wickets, I thought that was the key reason that I gave Netherlands any chance in this game. If they were an economical bowling unit, I would have been like, they can keep them quiet, but eventually one of the big guys is going to biff it at the end and it's going to be all over. But it was that pressure that I thought they could get by taking wickets. So was it a surprise to me? Yes, because if you say something's a 1 in 10 chance, you're not suggesting it's going to happen. But I wasn't accidental with why I came up with those numbers. And I certainly thought there was a chance, whereas I think probably most other people wouldn't. But most people don't do the levels of nonsense and research that I get to, right? So I do think that all played a part in that. But then, you know, sometimes shit just happens. And if they hadn't have batted first, would they been able, you know, they might have taken a bunch of wickets, and then Markram and Miller, for instance, or Klaassen might have knocked the ball around for a little bit, got to the end, and then, you know, those tailenders could have got a few sixes away. Next thing you know, South Africa's got 116. Now Netherlands are under pressure. You know, they hadn't scored anything like that in this tournament either. Would they have been able to do it? South Africa would have had, you know, would have had all them everything on their side at that stage. So, you know, you make your assumptions. I think the game played out far more the way I thought it would than normally it would. Usually you do all that sort of stuff, and you know everything you put in your head doesn't matter because the other team won the toss. Gabrielle says, shouldn't we all understand by now that QDK can't anchor a leading T20 team? I mean, he looked brilliant early in the thing. I find him a really interesting T20 player because I think I talked about this with Farkas Zaman earlier. They're fantastic talents. Are they more attacking in the other formats than they are in T20 cricket? And I know that's a weird thing to say. I also think that Quinton de Kock has played so much cricket in the matchup era, and it feels that there are just a lot of teams who kind of get how to bowl to him. We know that once he gets going, he's absolutely destructive. But we also know maybe that there's a roof to that destruction in T20 cricket in a way that perhaps in Test cricket there isn't. I think he's a really interesting case study for he's an attacking player in Test cricket, so he must be a really good T20 player. And when we might go back on it, we might have a look at it and go, look, he was good. And look, played in some good Mumbai teams. He's got the second skill available to him. Everyone's afraid of him. You talk to other teams and they are terrified of Quinton de Kock. But I'm not sure his general numbers always back that up. And that was part of the reason that I was a little bit colder on them, on their batting. Not that I still think he's a fantastic player and I love watching him. But that was one reason why I did think to myself, I like Quinton de Kock more when their top 7 is stacked. And maybe when their top 6 is stacked, and then you got Wayne Parnell and you got Bavuma opening with him, it looks a little bit weaker. Where are we now? Roshith says, if most batters... Is that the right question? Yeah. If most batters decide how to face an 85-mile-an-hour bowler in the first 3 yards, then which batters have the best record against 85-mile-an-hour bowlers specifically? Well, it's 80 miles an hour, really. It's even 75 miles an hour. You can't track a ball. I don't know what the exact speed is, but there's a certain speed at which the human eye cannot track a cricket ball, right? And it's somewhere in the high 70s, I think. And you put a bowling machine on at 80 miles an hour, and you'll start to see what I mean. So most cricketers, when we play, so I'm talking about, you know, assuming your level, Roshith, but certainly my level, I'm a decent bat. I can hold my own against the bowler where I can track the ball. The minute I can't track the ball by watching it all the way onto my bat, I'm terrible. And it doesn't need to be a particularly fast bowler, but the minute that I need to do this other thing called a Psyche. So when you say, if most batsmen decide how to face an 85-mile-an-hour ball in the first 3 yards, so we should only check their record against those bowlers, you're talking about professional cricket. You're talking about first-class cricket, and you're talking about Test cricket. And, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is you have to throw away the spinners. But that's what you have to do. It's called a Psyche, and you basically read the ball for the first 2 or 3 meters, whatever it is, and then you get into position of where you think that ball is going to go, and you play your shot. And that's what they do. And that's the difference between, you can see really good club players who, when they get to that next level, aren't particularly good. That's the thing they can't do. And that's the thing that we haven't worked out how to teach players how to do that yet. It's a really natural thing. And I don't know if they've worked on this in baseball as well. But that is the next super skill, I think, to be able to work out is how you can train young players to be able to do this. Because the first person, if it's possible, the first person to be able to train people how to do that will take a bunch of very average looking, well, not average looking players, but a very average players. And suddenly they'll have a bunch of first class and Test players coming out of their area. But I've never, because the science is still quite new, and I don't think we quite know how to track it correctly from an eye perspective. I'm not sure how we would train other players on that. But the whole thing's really, really fascinating. I think, did I do a video on it? I think I've done a video on it of recent times. But yeah, I can't remember, sorry. Vikas says, do we need a fourth umpire now? So this goes back to what I said the other day. We can all see the same thing. There are very few times when you show something when it's 100% of people who've seen it will see it. Sometimes, there'll be a ball outside of stump, there'll be an inside edge back onto the pads and all that. But most of those more contentious decisions have something that people see slightly differently. Part of it goes back to the eyesight thing of that previous question. Our eyes are all drawn to slightly different things. And if you look at those runouts, the two that went against India in this tournament, where the ball hit the stumps and then the hands hit the stumps, there are people who don't see the ball hit the stumps first. I think I do. I've got friends who think they do, but I've got other friends who don't. The same with that edge today. And the same with also, on a very basic point, when it comes to third umpires, the biggest problem with third umpires is that they are not specialists. It is a fundamental it is completely different to normal umpiring, because you need to know how the cameras work, you need to know what to ask for, and you need to be more proactive than you do in normal umpiring. We're getting them to do it at best 1 in every 3 times. There is no reason now not to have 20 specialist third umpires and 40 specialist on-field umpires, and to be able to do it that way. And we can have better technology. We can have them in bunkers. They don't need to be at the grounds. We can have them with specialists. We can have independent people working with them. All these sorts of things can happen. Where we currently are, we're not doing that. And so mistakes do happen a lot. You see quite often just basic mistakes of third umpires not understanding the protocol. And you see them not asking for the right cameras. I think it might have even been that Dinesh Karthik run out. Was it the Akshar? It might have been the Akshar Patel run out. The last footage he showed of it, he was shown from the back angle, but he didn't have one last look of a split screen from the front of that run out, which I think would have been the better angle. So it does tell you that, we're still not ideal with that sort of thing. But also, even if we get more ideal, there'll still be mistakes, because that is how humanity is. We don't have the technology to give us the answers perfectly, and people are still going to misinterpret things. That's how it goes. Anand says, was Rishabh Pant's dismissal his fault, or just brilliant fielding by Bell? Was his dismissal his fault? Well, he was trying to score quickly in a T20 game, and he hit the ball and he was caught. That's kind of what you do. There is an inherent risk in playing boundary shots. And I think too often we have situations where people don't understand that there is a risk in the way. If you look at the way that Sky batted today, he plays this incredible innings and everyone goes off about it. Go back and have a look at those highlights I showed you from the start. He got a top edge straight up in the air to start his first boundary, I think, today. If he plays the exact same shot, goes straight up in the air, and he's caught, what's the narrative? All right. Oh, it's okay because he made runs. What if he does that 3 times in a row? He's playing the same shots, right? And we know he can execute those shots. He does it in the nets. He's done it in previous games. We can't put too much weight on any one person being dismissed in any one game. And I think in T20 cricket, even more so. We are asking these players to score and take risks at incredible rates. We then have to then accept that they're going to fail a fair bit. And they do, and they will continue to do so. Archit says, Josh Little, Van Meeker, and Tuscan Ahmed, Blessing Muzrambani. Who gets the IPL contract this auction? Ooh, okay. So Little makes the most sense because he's left arm. I don't think Blessing's that far away because of his height. I think Blessing would have already been on a bench if it wasn't for the fact that they don't have as many international players on the bench as they used to. Van Meekeren's a right arm seamer. Would we have to? I think he's been fantastic. And he's certainly improved as a bowler. I find it hard for anyone to take a chance on him. Tuscan Ahmed's been really good. I think, having looked at his numbers, a lot of them are very dependent on the last month or so. The reason I like him is because he's an Asian bowler who, I know Bangladesh conditions are different to Indian conditions, but he profiles as someone who at least is used to that sort of thing a little bit more than the other guys on this list. But yeah, if you're asking me to rank them in most likely, I would go Little 1, Blessing 2, Tuscan 3, Van Meekeren 4. Dave says, will the semi-final venues influence how teams approach their games? Fresh pitches, short square boundaries in Adelaide. Yeah, definitely. I think fresh pitches is quite interesting. We've seen, I think maybe partly because it's early Australian wickets more than anything else, but the reused pitches have really died in a way that Australian pitches don't particularly die. So I do think that will change the way that teams go about those sorts of things. What else? Short square boundaries. Yep. You'll be, thinking about, the way that your teams go, especially with the spinners. You'd be looking at also probably recent data when it comes to spin in Adelaide and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I think they'll get quite specific with that sort of information. But to go back to Rohit Sharma's point from India's first game against Pakistan, I suppose, when they're at the MCG, was it that game? I think it was that game. When he said, we don't have a lot of data on this ground at this time of the year. We don't really know how it's going to play. Well, this whole World Cup has proved that, Dave. So I think from that perspective, I think they'll look a little bit at this tournament. They'll certainly look at the ground dimensions. They will have a look at the data, but they may not back it as much as anything in that particular case. But it'll definitely play a part. Ajinkya says, since Adelaide is this spin, and could be a bit of a slower track, I feel both India and England would want to have two spinners. Well, England will have two spinners. They'll have three probably. So they don't need to change their side. India obviously need to make a selection from that. I'm not sure it will be a slower track though. It's not traditionally a very slow track. We've seen, as I said, some of these reused pitches have been a little bit slower. At full strength, I don't expect it to be massively slow, but I haven't looked at any data of the ball speeds in this particular tournament or how it's been coming off the deck for slower balls or anything like that. But I wouldn't have thought so. But the spinners thing, yeah. But you also have to then factor in the boundary sides, because if India are going in with two spinners, they're going with two spinners who basically spin the ball in one direction, and that can be a little bit tricky in those ways. Whereas England have two spinners who can spin the ball in either direction. Imad says, how big of a negative impact would the cancellation of Super League be on associate nations? Yeah, it's huge. It's funny you mentioned Ireland and Afghanistan, because I actually think Netherlands is the team who's going to struggle the most with this, because I can't see how they will regularly... It's incredible for them to have 4 major teams come and play them this summer. You talk to people in Dutch cricket and they were just absolutely over the moon. They were so happy. I remember Peter Boren, I think he was on TalkSport with us when we were commentating them, and he was saying, you go to Dutch games and you know everyone. And he said, it's not sad because it's a great environment. He loves it. And he said, but he went there this year and he didn't know everyone. And you could hear the passion within him. And he's a very passionate man anyway, but it was certainly radiating from him. That's going to be huge for them not to have that. So for those who don't know, the Super League was the one-day tournament, which is why Netherlands got all these games. It's not the only thing that's been cancelled. The other thing that was cancelled was the support that the ICC used to give a lot of the associate teams, which allowed a team like Ireland and Afghanistan to punch above their weight because they had access to analysts and video, sometimes fitness trainers, all these other things that they couldn't necessarily afford. And they were basically... Richard Doan, who's now coaching in America, he basically took what Bob Woolmer did. So Bob Woolmer is the grandfather of associate cricket. He's a big part of the reason why these teams have been so good. Richard Doan took his work and made it even better. And then the new ICC CEO came in, who was eventually sacked. And he basically got rid of that completely. And so you now got two things that was helping developing all these teams. There's a part of me that thinks that there's just such a movement, Papua New Guinea, Nepal, and then all the, UAE, Oman, even teams that are not in both the World Cups, and then you've got Namibia and Scotland and Netherlands. It just feels like there is a bit more of a movement now, and USA is going to be the next one, of course. That I'm hoping that it won't have as negative an impact, but there should be a regression from some of those teams. It was brilliant for the Netherlands to be able to have their best players playing against. It was brilliant for the Netherlands to have some of their best young players to play against all those good teams and really see what the benchmark is. See the other teams warming up. See the other teams preparing. All those sorts of things. really important for what is still a very semi-amateur, a semi-professional thing. Adil says, how should teams handle captains not making runs in important tournaments? We've seen this in the IPL, right? The problem is that the captaincy position is such a finite position that it causes issues once it becomes, once the player drops form. And all captains are going to drop form, right? It's very rare to have a captain be consistently informed the whole time they're in charge. And we've had this in Test cricket, and we've had this in one-day cricket, and in T20 cricket, it always looks a bit, I think form drops look a bit more stark in T20 cricket generally, partly because the games come so close together, if nothing else. And because it's almost like a form drop in T20 cricket can be two things, right? It can be scoring slowly and not scoring at all. And they're both bad. And, you know, you look at the David Warner one from a couple of years ago when he was with the Sunrisers. Now, they got rid of their captain, and David Warner went on to win a World Cup with Australia and make a lot of runs after that. So he probably shouldn't, and it caused, that franchise basically fell apart because of that decision in many different ways. It still is falling apart from what I can tell. So it's really, really tough. There's almost, I'm almost going to say this, there's almost nothing you can do other than back them. Because I think if you make a change midway through a tournament, that's also horrendous. The only other way of doing it is almost going in and saying, we have a leadership group, and in this game, this guy's going to captain, or this guy's going to captain this part of it, and this guy's going to captain this part of it. But you are then saying that based on the fact that you don't want to give one person the major job, and because they might lose form. So you're already starting that on a negative. I find the form thing in T20 cricket is the most elusive part of it, just because it's not like a test match where you're in really bad form and you go back and you play our domestic game and you scratch around and you make 70 of 180 balls and no one's there and it doesn't matter. And you come back and you feel a little bit better and you get an edge and second slips drops you and you make 50 and you're back and things start to flow and your footwork just comes in a little bit more and then you start to see the ball and all those sorts of things. T20 cricket, it just feels like even when you go back, you're still expected to score at a decent rate. So there's that pressure. So it's harder to play yourself back in. It's such an elusive thing. And if you look, it's not just batters, of course. You watch Boovie, right? I thought it was ridiculous when people were telling me he was finished. It was clear that he was trying to play himself back in and he wasn't quite at full fitness, because in the middle of him being terrible, he'd been absolutely brilliant. So when his body was working and when his hand was there and when his rhythm came through, everything was still there. But the problem is you couldn't also you couldn't look at the fact that he wasn't taking wickets anymore and that he was struggling. He was going for runs that he'd never gone for before and pretend that that wasn't happening, right? Form in T20 cricket is just really, really interesting. How you use batters and how you use bowlers, because I do think that there is probably a better way that we can handle it. And moving players around into different roles and making them think differently and on all those sorts of things that I don't think we quite do at the moment. But I also think that part of the problem is the preparation. We don't prepare players correctly for T20, and this is more batting, but a little bit bowling as well. You go to the nets and these guys are still bowling a lot of balls and facing a lot of balls. And that's how you should prepare out of season. In season, I'm not sure that's the best way to prepare for a T20 thing. I think your better thing would be saying you're going to face 12 to 15 balls today. And we want to see what you can make of those 12 to 15 balls. If you go out, you go out, but we want you to face the 12 to 15 balls because that's what you're going to have to do in this game. And I do watch some of these guys, and you get it, right? Like I understand why they do it. But they go off and they have like hour of throwdowns. I'm like, you have it. I'm not, unless you're working on something really specific, which you're probably not going to be able to fix midway through a tournament anyway. I'm not sure that's the best way of thinking about it. I'd almost prefer if they did 3 different net sessions where they all went and faced 10 or 12 balls and just tried to whack them and then go, okay, I'm out. Anyway, absolutely great. For those of you who are new to the channel today, there's tons of videos there. There's one on Virat Kohli's 6, of which Human Being says, where are we? Your analysis of Virat Kohli's 6 was amazing. Thank you. For that. go find that video. We also did one on Pakistan, which is already out of date, which says everything about Pakistan cricket that you need to know. But that was a fun one as well. I'm going to go off now and spend some time with my kids. And then when my kids go to bed, I'm going to try and belt out a video on, well, I've got about 4 topics to do. But go and find all the podcasts that we do at 99.94. I'm sure there'll be a really interesting Australia on 99.94 podcast coming out very soon. And there'll be a very interesting South Africa on even more interesting, maybe heartbreaking, a podcast on South Africa on 99.94 coming out soon. Thanks to everyone for coming on again. We'll be back again tomorrow. I don't know what time we'll do tomorrow yet, but we'll try and do some sort of a preview type episode, maybe looking ahead to the World Cup semi-finals, and we'll certainly we'll try and get we'll have content every day. I didn't get a chance to do the Ganathalaka story today. If you haven't seen it, it looks like he's been arrested for sexual assault, I believe. There was so much going on in the games. By the time I saw that, I didn't get a chance to put it into the show. But I'll try and drop a little bit more on that tomorrow. But support us at 99.94. Find us at wherever you find in your social media. We're on YouTube. We're on your podcast threads. And a big thanks to everyone for coming on the show again today. And we'll see you again tomorrow.